Hello, all you happy hammerhead bats out there. Those are a thing. Hi, welcome to an episode of A Little Greener, a podcast all about sustainability, nature, and conservation. Wow, I struggled through that intro. Hello, I am one of your hosts, Casey, and I am joined by the wonderful Sarah. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hello. What brought on hammerhead bats? I definitely thought you were going to say sharks, first of all. So,
Obviously, like my muscle memory of speaking also thought I was going to say sharks, even though my brain was like, no, no, bats. Because today we're talking about batteries, and I was like, bats, batteries, that connects.
oh,
And then I had seen a picture the other day of hammerhead bats, which are a very, look it up, guys. You'll be like, no, that's a Star Wars character. Thank you very much. But they've been discussed a lot of times negatively as a disease reservoir in some things. I think I saw a picture of one this week, and that's what I decided to do. So, hey, you may have learned about a new animal today.
I'm so mad that I didn't make the bat battery connection.
Well, I mean, I threw you off with hammerhead shark. So now I need to Google hammerhead bat, make sure it exists and that I'm not crazy. Sarah, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. It's been it's been a lot here recently, as I know it has been for you too. It's also been very hot, which I know is just a life choice that I've made living where I live. But so I'm marathon training right now.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
also knew that was a choice that I made. You were going to run a marathon in the fall, you're going to train in the summer. But I am feeling every bit of that 60 whatever tree cover score that I got
Oh,
going
yeah.
into our Who
You're
Gets the
like, where
Trees
are all these
episode.
dang trees?
I There is no shade anywhere in my neighborhood at any time of day. It doesn't matter if I go in the morning. When I work, I have to go in the afternoon, which is the worst time to run, but like it just doesn't matter. There's no shade. And then I go 10 minutes away in the neighborhood with the 90 something tree score, and at least there's no matter which way I run, there's shade somewhere. Not all the time, but man, feeling that difference. So I'm hot and I'm tired. That's how I'm doing right now. And
Well,
I wish we had more trees.
I mean, what I'm hearing is that there is an untapped demographic of people who should be advocating for tree cover, and that is
Yes.
marathon runners,
Runner, any runner,
any runners.
any runner. Yep. That's how I'm doing. How are you doing?
Anywhere on the East Coast these last couple of weeks was not a great place to be. It was hot everywhere. Obviously, in Florida, you're like signed up for it, but it was extra unbearable, I think, for everybody. We're a little bit out of it here, so that's good. I'm good. My husband was in Guatemala for 2 weeks doing turtle research, which is very cool. But I am just eternally grateful that he is back because
Yay.
I needed help. But yeah, I'm here. I can't say my brain's working at 100% full function. Update on hammerhead bats. They are also called hammer-headed bats. That's like their most common name, but according to Wikipedia, I'm still not wrong. So win there.
Yay.
But like I said, Sarah, I said bat because you're going to talk to us about batteries today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about batteries, which admittedly is not as much fun as, say, butterflies, like we talked
Yeah, if you
about in
haven't
our
listened to that episode, do
so
it.
good. But I do think it's an important one, especially with the way that our lives and our technology are going. So
Totally.
we're in chat in particular about the lithium-ion battery, which is everywhere these days. And I've seen some things floating around the interwebs here recently that made me decide to talk about it a little deeper. So, Casey, to kick us off, one of the most common places that you might have a lithium-ion battery is in our cell phones that everybody carries around with them all the time. So, question for you, where's your phone at night, and do you charge your cell phone overnight?
I do charge my cell phone overnight. It's my alarm clock,
Yeah.
which, like, I'm sure sleep hygiene wise is not very healthy, but it's my alarm clock. It's plugged in right next to me. I have had like late night calls before that I'm glad that my phone was near me, but it feels like the only time of day that I can properly charge my cell phone. Ironically, today I forgot my cell phone at home and I felt like every 3 seconds I was reaching for it. So. it's definitely by my side a lot, and a lot of my job social media, so I whip it out a lot to take pictures of everything. I do know that at least historically, like charging overnight was not supposed to be super kosher. It was supposed to degrade your battery or things like that. But I'm really excited to learn more about it because it's right in my pocket all the time.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. Mine is definitely in my pocket with me all day, every day too. And yeah, I sleep with it right by my head every single night. It is also my alarm clock, and I do charge it. One of the most useful gifts I've ever been given is one of those charging pads. So I can just set it right there. I don't even have to plug it in. I can just set it and let it charge overnight, which did used to be something that people would caution against, is overcharging and things like that, which we'll talk a little bit about, is maybe not necessarily as much the case with these batteries. But we are going to talk a little bit about safety and concerns people have with lithium ion battery safety. So I did just want to point that out right from the get-go, that people who might have concerns about battery safety, no, 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 don't make a face at me,
Okay.
Casey. I'm telling you, I think it's fine. I do it too.
Okay.
And I'm just pointing out that people who may voice concerns sometimes with battery safety probably also sleep with one right by their head and don't even think about it. So stick around for a conversation on lithium ion batteries. All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of A Little Greener. We're chatting about batteries today. And like I was saying in our intro, this is at least initially inspired by some things that I was seeing going around on social media. Not anything new, just some resurfacing of things that I've seen related to electric vehicles. This discussion isn't going to be about electric vehicles. We have an episode from a while back on electric vehicles in general, where we did touch on lithium-ion batteries. I don't think we devoted a whole lot of time to it. So this is maybe kind of the flip side, by which I mean I'm talking about this in large part because of electric vehicles, but it is going to be more focused on the battery than the car, if that makes
Just to
sense.
clarify, is this the thing where they talk about how short the lifespan of the battery is, or is this the one where they talk about how it explodes?
How it explodes. Yes.
Okay.
It's the one that I've been seeing. Yes, that was my initial inspiration. And so I did want to address some of the concerns raised in the particular video that I was seeing. But I do think it's also important to talk a little bit about the other impacts of these batteries. So kind of three areas we're going to touch on today. And we're just I don't want to say we're going to dive in the deep end. We're going to like float on top of the deep end.
Okay, we're
In a
gonna
little,
like skim the top of the
yeah.
water like a bird snatching a water skipper off the top.
Yes. So we could do a deep dive on any one of these things, but I just kind of wanted to go over the basics today in looking at environmental impact, social justice issues, and then the safety issue with lithium ion batteries. Real quick before we do that, let's talk about why we use this type of battery in the first place. We're all probably very familiar with our good old standby alkaline batteries. I've got alkaline batteries in my remote controls right now. Casey, you may have toys
Is that
around
like
your
a
house.
double A or a
Yes, yeah,
D? Okay,
yep,
cool, cool.
yep. If you have a flashlight or, like I said, a remote control, or even like your smoke detector batteries, the little rectangle ones, those are all alkaline batteries. So they can sit around for a while, really kind of low energy tasks. My remote control is not using that much energy. Your smoke detector, just, kind of low level stuff. Casey, what items do you have that you can think of, if any? We know one for sure, right? That have lithium ion batteries.
So I think you might be assuming that my battery knowledge is higher. Does my laptop have one?
Yes.
Okay, cool, cool. I mean, assume my hybrid car has one since that's
Possibly.
possibly. Ooh,
Yeah. So actually, I assumed
curveball.
that mine did too, and then I went to check, and actually, it seems that the year for the make and model of my car, they were actually using like a nickel metal
Okay.
battery
Yeah.
and not a lithium ion. So it's possible that yours does. It's also possible that it doesn't. But I can tell you, just sitting right here, my laptop, my phone, my watch, my smartwatch, probably I have a set of Bluetooth running headphones, probably have a lithium ion battery. Sometimes power tools will have them. Sometimes electric toothbrushes will have them. So I
Are
actually
like some
have,
of them rechargeable? Can you recharge them?
yeah, so that's a
Yes.
big
Oh, obviously it's my laptop.
positive. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So when we talk about just kind of thinking about the list of things that we mentioned for alkaline batteries and the list of things we mentioned for lithium ion, you can maybe start to see some of the benefits of those lithium ion batteries. So these are going to be higher energy density, so they can store a larger amount of energy in a smaller battery size. So we can up the power of the devices that these things can power. They do have a relatively speaking longer lifespan than other batteries.
It makes sense. Your phone battery lasts a
Hmm.
couple years, even if it's degrading over
Yeah.
time.
I
Can't
mean,
expect the remote battery to do that.
most people get new phones every couple of years. I keep my phones for many years. And
Same.
those batteries do last. And I mean, think about our electric vehicles. Longer lifespan, and they are rechargeable as well. So those are like huge big three proponents that the lithium ion battery gives us. And so obviously that it is the main type of battery now found in electric vehicles, which are just becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Casey, do you remember anything when we talked about electric vehicles, specifically about the batteries? Either do you remember anything that we talked about, or anything that we haven't already touched upon around like what maybe some concerns are around these batteries? Or do you have any concerns around these batteries?
Well, I know that there was a very common meme, especially after the Inflation Reduction Act, I think was the one that invested a lot of infrastructure into increasing electric
Hmm.
vehicles and put some mandates on phasing more of those in. And at that time, I saw a lot on social media the concern about the battery wearing out way too quickly and that negating the cost of the car. When exploring into that, I think we discovered that the cost that was cited was overinflated in these memes and that the lifespan of the battery was underestimated in a lot of these
Hmm.
memes. The thing that I see more of, and honestly, as I filter through my news, and this is my own location and privilege bias showing, is I see a lot of concern about the mining process for maybe not lithium ion, it might be other types of batteries as well, but the concern in countries like the Congo of our electric future basically being built on the backs of people in these countries who are actually mining the minerals. So that's something that's definitely concerning to me. A future that does not have as warmed a planet is good for everyone, but having select people disproportionately affected while different set of people are benefiting from that technology is definitely concerning to me, but also something that I haven't spent the energy to really chase down.
Yeah, so we will touch on that for sure when we talk about social justice. Absolutely. So I do want to, just because my brain has them in this order, we'll put a pin in that one and come back to it. And let's start off with just kind of where you first started there, with just the direct environmental impact. So what is the impact of mining? And I'm going to focus particularly on lithium mining for this. Obviously, lithium is not the only thing that these batteries need, the only material that gets mined, but I do want to stick particularly on the lithium as we talk about this, because the demand for lithium is increasing. In large part, it is due to demand for batteries for electric vehicles as well. So I was looking at some articles from the International Energy Agency, or IEA, and they said that automotive lithium-ion battery demand increased by about 65% to 550 gigawatt hours. Everything in me wants to say gigawatt hours. Thank you, Back to the Future. Uh, from about 330 gigawatt hours in 2021, primarily as a result of growth in electric passenger car sales, with new registrations increasing by 55% in 2022 relative to 2021. So more people are looking at electric vehicles, which I think is very good news. However, then the increase in battery demand does drive the demand for critical materials. In 2022, lithium demand exceeded supply, as it also did in 2021, despite the 180% increase in production since 2017. So we have ramped up our production, but we're still not getting enough currently. In 2022, about 60% of lithium, 30% of cobalt, and 10% of nickel demand was for electric vehicle batteries. Just 5 years earlier, in 2017, those numbers were around 15%, 10%, and 2%, respectively. So all these numbers just kind of trying to highlight the demand that is out there and that there is a need to get access to these materials to meet the demand.
Yeah. And these are all the things, lithium, cobalt, and nickel are all ones that have definitely come up in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And we've both worked at institutions, I think, who have worked on like cell phone
Mm-hmm.
collections to help save gorillas because cobalt is found in their habitat. No, maybe. One of those elements is found that's in the batteries is found in
Cobalt
their
is
habitat.
mined. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Coltan is another thing we
Coltan,
talk about
that's what
with
it
cell
is.
phones, but cobalt is also mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know that there's a little bit of conservation already going on around it, but just the increase into this size battery compared to the one in your phone, it's
Right.
interesting. I'm sure there's a
Yes.
lot of different processes that would go about repurposing those versus your cell phone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that is still being worked on. More
Agreed.
to come. Yes. Unfortunately, not as much more to come as I wish there was, but yes, we will come back around to that too. So I knew basically nothing about lithium mining,
Nope, me
and
neither.
lithium is mined in sort of the traditional pit mining, get it from the rock way. And I didn't write this down, of course, but I think Australia might actually be the top producer now, and that is from rock. However, previous to that, and still number two, I think, is Chile, and
Okay.
they do their lithium mining through brine extraction. This is one of the main ways that lithium is mined, which is basically pumping brine, salt water largely, from underground reserves, pumping it into these big pools and evaporating all of that water to collect the material, and then using a whole bunch of fresh water a lot throughout the process of the whatever else needs to happen, the purification of that left behind stuff. So you're pumping out a lot of underground brine and you're using a lot of fresh water on top of that. So it is very water intensive. I stuck a picture in there, Casey, for you of one of the sites. Just these, it's just like a dozen, it's more than that, maybe a couple dozen different pools.
Yeah, and knowing at this moment almost none of the actual like health repercussions of having these nearby, if you were looking at this picture, you would not say, "Yeah, I want that in my backyard." I feel like the colors of these pools alone are like teal and
Part of the
lime
problem as
green.
well. Yeah. And of
Yes.
course, with either of these types of mining, whether you're doing it from the brine or from the rock, there is also concern of then groundwater contamination
Hmm.
from some of the chemicals and materials that are used throughout the process. So that's definitely a concern. Obviously, this is an impact once again, either way you're doing it, whether you're doing rock or brine, there's a habitat disruption element of this. And then there's just the water depletion in these areas. So brine is not something that's used for like human consumption in any way, but you're pumping this brine and then you're using a lot of fresh water to go along with it. So draining, you are still draining reserves of fresh water for both humans and wildlife. It's a pretty intensive process. And again, one of the main areas where this is coming from is South America. There's something called the Lithium Triangle, which is Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. Did I get my geography right?
That sounds
Definitely
right.
Chile and Argentina.
I'm
I
pretty
think
sure Bolivia's right in the
Bolivia's
middle
the
there.
third
Yeah.
one there. But I think altogether they have like 85% of brine reserves. So a
Wow.
lot of it's coming from there. Here in the United States, we currently only have one active lithium mine, which is a facility that mines lithium from brine in Nevada. But there's a whole number of other sites apparently that have been proposed, which again, we'll circle around to later. But that's kind of the basic gist of it. Rock mining, just as we have talked about mining for other things, but then I thought that this brine extraction was really interesting too.
Yeah, when we talk about mining, the first place that my 6-year-old brain always goes to is just the seven dwarves marching down with some pickaxes. So I always
If
think it's
only.
useful to clarify what methods are used because it's such a large ranging depending on the mineral and the space that you're in and the technology
Right.
that you have. So I appreciate you clarifying that because I've never heard of brine
Yeah.
mining before.
Quite honestly, it all feels this is just a hazard of my brain is that it just has trouble processing things unless I've seen it for myself. And
Fair.
so even though I'm talking about it, even though I read about it, even though I looked at pictures of it, I still struggle to fully comprehend how it works. And I think maybe that's true for a lot of us, which maybe makes it harder for us to understand the environmental impact. Like this is a big process. These are big facilities. There is a big impact. Interestingly, if you're listening to this, you may be thinking, well, she hasn't really like told us anything. Yeah, there's there's surprisingly not that much out there. Like I didn't find anything about like here's some specific species that are in the area that and I don't think it's because it's not happening. I think it's because it just hasn't been documented yet. Even like what I was reading about water use, some of the articles which will be shared in the show notes were talking about how there just isn't data's not available or the data is incomplete or we just like even life cycle analysis of lithium mining has looked at things like fossil fuel emissions, energy expenditure, hasn't really looked at water, which
Interesting.
is interesting. So let's step one, like let's
Right.
work on that.
Well, so Andrew just went to Guatemala for 2 weeks to help with a team sampling turtle populations there because they just don't really
Yeah,
have a lot of historical or current population data about turtles, like all turtles in Guatemala, or at least all freshwater turtles. And thinking about that from a country that's pretty actually close to us, it's just on the other side of Mexico, not really having a whole group of animals really understood, it makes so much sense that in a lot of these areas, you're not necessarily going to know exactly what was there 30 years ago, what was there right before the mine was there,
right.
what's being displaced around it, and how that mine is impacting those populations because you didn't have the privilege of having the population data prior to that. Like Vaughn had talked about in their butterfly episode about 1970 often being the barometer against which
Mm-hmm.
we measure species diversity and populations and richness. And for a lot of these species, we don't have 1970. We might not even have the year 2000. So I also think just from this, I agree with you, Sarah, that sometimes you don't even know what you're missing out of the picture after you've read it. You're like, I think I get it conceptually, but there has to be so much more to it that either someone's not explaining because they don't know, or that it's like just so integrated into their reality that they don't think to explain it to somebody else. So yeah, complicated things like this is how people get locked out of environmental issues.
Yeah,
This is just
absolutely.
it's far away. It's a little more complicated than maybe we're willing to tackle on an average day. And frankly, that's me too. I don't sometimes click on those articles, even though I know that my phone battery is impacting people's livelihoods in other countries. I feel a little powerless and
It-
it seems overwhelming.
yeah, I agree with that. We'll talk about that further here because let's go to that sort of social
Yeah.
justice aspect where, of course, land use and labor in a couple of different ways are the big issues. So let's start with land use and the impact of indigenous people. So this has come up in both Chile and Argentina with indigenous folks not giving the consent for the use of their, not being able to give the consent,
Right.
basically saying that they don't have the right to that land, and also losing their way of life. So whether that was tourism, or one article I was reading talked about a group who did salt extraction as part of their way of life. I don't know anything about that. I don't know what that entails, but pumping out all of the brine is impacting their way of life. And then, of course, like I mentioned, just the loss of water resources in an already very dry environment. So these folks losing access to their freshwater supply. So that is happening. Like that is currently happening. Links will be in the show notes to some articles where you can read a little bit more about that in a little more depth. And that could also happen here. So I mentioned the proposed lithium mining sites in the United States. Apparently, there's 72 proposed sites in the United States. Once again, I don't know a lot about that process. I don't
Right.
know how many of those 72 would actually end up going through or how far along in any sort of process that they are. But the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at Arizona State University found that 9 of those 72 proposed lithium mines are within 10 miles of Native American reservations that already has a long, hard history with mining and abandoned mines and dangerous materials.
And resource extraction
Mm-hmm.
being identified as suddenly people pushed them into particular plots of land that were sort of deemed useless to
Mm-hmm.
the rest of society at the time. And then the second that there's some
Until
sort
they're
of
not.
right, and then it's like, oh, there's oil under there. Oh, there's lithium nearby. And yeah, typically they're not necessarily on the winning side of a lot of those things. If you haven't read The Killers of the Flower Moon, a really great environmental justice story as well, how mineral extraction has impacted in lots of sneaky ways Native Americans. But we've talked about in prior episodes that Indigenous people across the world have a better record of protecting biodiversity in the areas that they currently occupy than even national lands that have restricted access to people at all. Like well-managed
Yeah,
lands by Indigenous people
just
overall are
fascinating.
better. Yeah, such a fascinating series of studies. There's so many different studies that have looked at and confirmed different elements of that. But it's such a just we just keep doing it over and over
Yep.
again where you find something that all of a sudden is worth something. And they're I think what you're about to talk about a little bit is they're treated like an impediment to
Yes.
moving forward.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention that because, and it was in one of the articles that I'll link to as well, is sometimes when it comes to this, I think sometimes Indigenous communities can sometimes be portrayed negatively, whether that's intentional or not, in just an article headline or something like that. Or sometimes, especially if you're somebody who is like, yeah, we need to do this, we need XYZ material or whatever, you might have a negative perception as Indigenous people are blocking progress. And that is just, ooh, it's such a it's missing the full picture, I think. And so in one of the articles that will be linked, a woman by the name of Monica Ndowen, forgive any mispronunciation. She's an indigenous leader in Indonesia, and she says, we're not anti-development, but we have to be informed, is how she put it. And that's at least sometimes a big part of the issue is that they are not getting recognition from the government. They're not getting any discussion. They're not getting their say with the government. So it's not always, no, we don't want this to happen. It's a, hey, we need to be included in this process, and our right to be here needs to be respected, and our livelihoods and our way of living and our health and our safety all need to be prioritized in this. And sometimes that might mean this should
Right.
not be happening here or in this way. But it doesn't always, but it just
Or they need to be compensated. That's
yes.
another element that
Yeah.
oftentimes it's like, well, maybe if you don't have rights to it, then we don't really have to give you anything to develop it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was happening in a lot in Brazil, under the last presidential administration there, is trying to define out rights of indigenous folks so that their particular lands could be more open for resource extraction. So tale as old as time
Yeah, and that's
for
part
that.
of the issue that in Argentina more recently now too is a change in government and a removal
Oh yeah.
of some of the rights to the land. So yeah, it's rough to think about, and it does sort of feel sometimes like, well, I don't know what I can do about that. And
Right.
there's probably not a whole lot that we can do about what is going on in Chile or Argentina. But now we can know that, hey, there's the potential for this to become an issue here in the United States as well. And let's be just more aware of it and see if there is, opportunity there to speak out if we need to. So there's that issue. And then, of course, the labor issue is the best way that I know how to say it, and the abuse of people and child labor and human health and safety in mines. So from a different article was referencing a report from an organization called Global Witness, which investigated 3 emerging lithium mines in Zimbabwe, Namibia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and discovered miners working in unsafe conditions, whether that be workers overexerting themselves, issues like dust inhalation, and exposure to toxic chemicals, with mine collapses, child labor, and high levels of corruption. And in these locations, we're talking about mining from rock. So this is obviously not the brine extraction. This is digging materials out of the ground. And it says that oftentimes they're using old mines, like digging within seams from old mines to get this. And this is for cobalt as well in these locations, which again, cobalt is also used in lithium-ion batteries. So there is a lot of unfair and unsafe working conditions related to this. And that quite literally makes me feel sick to my stomach. Like at one point when I was researching this episode, I was like, I just have to stop. Like, I don't want to read about this anymore.
Yeah.
And in part, like we were just saying, is because I'm like, I don't have an answer to give on this. This is not good. I don't know how to fix it. The one thing that I will say, and maybe this still sounds terrible, I'm not trying to make excuses for the lithium-ion battery. These are not the only materials that this happens with. And I mean, this ultimately makes it worse, but like, I mean, you might think about the clothes that you wear, the shoes that you.
Yes.
Um, so what I don't want anybody to do is say, oh, this is horrible. I'm not gonna even think about buying a hybrid or an electric vehicle because I don't want to support this industry. I mean, we've talked about it with like tuna and things like
Yeah.
so just recognize that it's okay to both be appalled by this and still want to support the emerging technology. I don't have a good answer necessarily for how to
Yeah.
marry those two, but I just
Well,
wanted to state that.
it's 100% worth talking about all the drawbacks and exploring all the technology options we have ahead of us. One of the things that I've seen discussed on NPR, for example, they were talking about electric vehicles, and this is a little after the electric battery, but actually in the manufacturing process, China is producing extremely inexpensive electric vehicles, and the US is producing more expensive ones and not quite keeping up with demand. So there's talk of, do we allow the electric vehicles from China to come in to make electric vehicles more accessible to people? Or do you just keep it so that American companies can better compete? But the reason that these interviewers were citing that the Chinese vehicles were less expensive is because there was labor exploitation in the process. And so by keeping barriers or tariffs or regulations as the main consumers of these products, there are certain things that our government can do to try and enforce better standards for labor and safety regulations and stuff like that. So very much like as an individual consumer, we've talked about this before, it's very hard to do just about anything, but as a community, as a local, state, national government, there are some big things because we are interacting with the end product that we can do.
Yeah. And sort of with that and thinking about our ability to control things, what was going around in my head, once again, not fully understanding all these processes, is if part of our concern is labor conditions and the like in other countries,
Do we open
should
it here?
we have
Yeah.
more mining here?
Yeah. As a conservationist, is your
No,
like
for me,
initial instinct?
I think we should, but so another article that I'll link to in the show notes was a story about apparently Maine has a good supply of lithium and likely perhaps more places in New England states as well, but they will not allow mining. It's that it goes back to that thing. Well, we want this, we just don't want it here.
Right.
And so it's just like there's this divide and it is hard.
Oh, it's so complicated. All
I
right, I
will
think
we'll come
I
back
was gonna
around to
say,
that at the end
if we
too.
stay in this
Yeah.
mode, we will keep going forever. So Sarah,
Yeah.
what's the next thing that we want to talk about
So
with you?
let's wrap up here with this the thing that sort of initially inspired me to talk about this, which was the safety aspect in particular about electric vehicle fires. The one that I was seeing, and again, I had seen this before, is something about a car in Canada. I already can't remember exactly what city it was in Canada. I could not verify whether the story actually being shared was true or not. There is some truth to some of those concerns that were shared along with the post. Not ones, however, though, that should make you afraid to buy an electric vehicle. So
Honestly, the idea of the battery blowing up is so much less immediately frightening than the extremely flammable gasoline that I
that's what
need
I was
to
about to
interact
say.
with all
Our
the
cars
time.
are literally, it's called an internal combustion
Right.
engine. It's in the name. Our cars are already flammable. But in total fairness, there are some special concerns with lithium-ion
Sure.
battery
Tell me about
fires.
them.
So
Yeah.
let's put that out there because I do think that that is important to acknowledge. So we talked about these batteries being high energy density. There's a lot of power in there, a lot of energy in a small space. That's dangerous in a certain sense.
Right.
However, assuming that your battery has been properly manufactured and maintained, these batteries are safe. They go through testing to make sure that they are safe, and they go through testing to make sure that they are safe in the same way that your internal combustion. I don't I'm not saying that they're tested in the exact same way, but that their
They have
level
their
of
own standards.
safety
Yeah.
is the same as the internal combustion vehicles. However, damaged batteries or improperly manufactured batteries can pose a safety risk, the main of which being is something called thermal runaway, which basically is what it sounds like. If your battery gets too hot, it's basically going to start off a chain reaction where it just goes into this quote uncontrollable self-heating state. So your damaged battery cells are releasing heat faster than it can dissipate, which can lead to it catching on fire and or the leakage of chemicals. And the truth is that these fires are very difficult to put out. So part of, I think, what was being circulated in the post is that firefighters won't even go near an electric vehicle that is on fire. And in fact, generally speaking, as long as there's no danger to surrounding like structure, that actually is the safest thing to do, is to let it burn itself out. So there is truth to that, honestly. I was reading about a couple of methods that they might use in other situations, one of which involved like putting it into like a big tank of something. And I was like, this doesn't sound very practical to me. So they may very well just let your car burn itself out. I think if your car is on fire, the car is probably lost anyway, regardless of how soon the
Oh,
firefighters put it out.
I
So
have
you go for it.
like a month or two ago, a car across the street from me caught on fire while I was at home and I had
Oh,
to call 911 for it. So I actually have like
yeah.
firsthand view. I'm pretty sure they never asked me on the phone what if I knew what kind of vehicle it really was, if it was, a regular internal
Yeah.
combustion engine or if it was electric. The fire company came because it was raining, but the entire vehicle was engulfed in flames. And there was rain coming down the street, but the gas was leaking out of it. And so the rain, like the stream of water, was also on fire going down the street. Isn't that crazy? And there was a
Whoa.
couple like explosions in there, so I had to like run out as fast as I could, move my car because it was close. And then they had to use the jaws of life to cut the like engine and turn off the car battery. So I have seen, I'm pretty sure it was just a regular car because I think I would notice if my neighbors had an electric vehicle. But I've seen a regular car on fire, and that process is not pretty either.
Wow.
So that's how they put out they use the fire extinguishers and things. So I guess, if it hadn't been, they would have just tried to contain. But in that case, the gasoline itself was the thing pouring down the street on
Yeah.
top of the
On fire.
rain on fire.
Wow.
So yeah, that had its own sort of specific threats as well. So yeah, that's
First-hand
my
reporting.
car on fire story.
And so again, I'm not looking at any of these things. So again, don't take any of this as professional. Like I'm not going to share any, here's what you should do in case of fire. But I'm pretty sure that what I was reading was talking about how like you can and they firefighters might use water or extinguishers to help control the blaze, but I think because of how much energy and heat is in these batteries, there is the potential that after they're put out, that they will just sort of reignite without warning, which is why they will
Once they're
let
damaged.
them burn themselves out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But another once again, linked in the show notes, article that I was reading about how they test these batteries beforehand. The guy was saying, like, it, and they obviously test them in far beyond reasonable conditions, right? They're doing crazy things to these batteries. So these batteries are tested, these cars are tested for safety. So we hear about these things. I really think that we hear about them so much because it is big news when it happens. We don't hear about regular car fires because internal combustion engines have been around forever and it's not news. if
There were no news
if
trucks
your
when
car, yeah, right,
the
if your
fire
car
department came.
gets damaged and catches on fire, it's just not news. Whereas electric vehicles are still news. Statistically, electric vehicles are much less likely to catch fire than cars with internal combustion engines, as best as we can tell. It's
Right.
not actually something that specifically tracked too much, but again, I'll link to where this information was coming from. And it's from other countries, but this is globally. So globally, statistically, electric vehicles are less likely to catch fire than internal combustion engines, and that does include accounting for. Obviously, we have a much higher percentage of internal
Right.
combustion engines on the road, but even accounting for that, statistically, EVs are still less likely to catch fire. That being said, we would love to make things even safer because, hey, let's make them safer if we can. So one thing that I just came across yesterday, I think I found this, is that there is already a newer, faster charging electric vehicle battery in the works, which charging time is one of the main drawbacks that people will still cite about electric vehicles. But in addition to this faster charging, one of the things that this article said was that as a result of making them faster charging, they generate less heat.
Cool.
So that makes them safer from overheating, obviously. So there you go. If that's something that you're concerned about, you can keep an eye out for that. And then going back to the article that I referenced about safety testing in Canada, a quote that I liked from that is you don't want to overregulate a new technology. You want to make sure that your baseline safety metrics for electric vehicles are the same as the ones used for internal combustion vehicles. Speaking to a gentleman that tests these batteries, and he says, I do this for a living and I still buy electric. So despite abusing batteries all day and seeing the results, he feels perfectly safe driving around in an electric vehicle. I did also want to mention too, and this article was shared with me after I had already started working on researching, so it was not part of the inspiration, but I definitely felt like worth mentioning is that this safety and social justice can kind of go hand in hand a little bit too. Because my mother actually shared with me an article about a fire at a lithium battery factory in South Korea, and this was really tragic. So, 22 people died
Wow.
in this factory fire. And it was mostly Chinese migrant workers. And I just, once again, reading this article, just it made me sick. So one fire official quoted in the article said that authorities would investigate whether fire extinguishing systems were at the site and if they worked. And
What?
maybe that's just something that you have to say. And maybe that's all that meant. Maybe there was something lost in translation somewhere. Maybe it was just like, yeah, we're going to double check everything. But shouldn't you know, shouldn't every factory have working fire extinguishing
I
systems?
work at a garden center and we have
And
fire
and
extinguisher
it's tested
inspectors.
regularly. And yeah. So once again, like maybe I'm just misreading the quote there, but that was like number one thing that I saw that was like, don't like that.
No, thank you.
And then the next quote, which sort of slightly contradicts the first one, another official said that workers at the site mobilized fire extinguishers but failed to put out the blaze. They later rushed to an area where there was no exit before they likely
Oh,
inhaled toxic smoke and lost their consciousness. The dead foreign workers were daily laborers, so they were not likely familiar with the building's internal structure. And then to wrap it up, South Korea, this is another quote from the article, South Korea has struggled for decades to improve safety standards and change widespread attitudes that regard safety as subservient to economic progress and convenience. And look, this just so happened to be a fire that took place in South Korea. Like, this is a global
yeah.
problem.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we again, tuna. A lot of
Hmm.
the people exploited in that industry are migrant workers. And
Hmm.
wow, yeah, global problems.
Yep. And it's a global problem. again, I'm mentioning this because of what I just talked about with thermal runaway, fire being an issue with lithium-ion batteries. So I did want to mention it. Certainly, accidents, fires can
Oh yeah.
happen at any sort of factory. So once again, I am pro. I love my laptop. I love my hybrid vehicle. I would love to get an electric vehicle. My point with this episode is not that we should chill out with the lithium ion batteries. So I'm not trying to suggest that at all. Like I said, I think it's just good to know more about all of the products that we use. So, Casey, sort of depressing way to end that.
It's
So
just
where do we go from here? Given what I just said, I don't think that the answer is let's not use lithium ion batteries because I'm talking about the concerns that exist. I am sitting here with 4 lithium batteries in my bedroom and I will sleep very soundly tonight. Like
right.
these are not, I think it would be illogical to sit here and be afraid to have a lithium ion battery in my house. But given the whole state of things, recognizing that there are environmental impacts, there are social justice impacts, that these batteries are not perfect, how do we move forward? And so there are a few things that we can do. One of them is minimize battery size. So we mentioned the one company that has a faster charging battery that is smaller. It is smaller than the typical battery found in an American electric vehicle. So one of the things that we can do as consumers, if we're looking to buy an electric vehicle here in the United States, is think about getting a smaller one.
Smaller car or smaller battery?
Smaller car, which will
Okay.
therefore have a smaller battery.
Oh, a hundred
Our
percent.
battery, average battery size in the American electric vehicle is larger
Because we have
than
larger
average
vehicles.
because of our larger vehicles. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, totally. I mean, I've kind of subscribed to this opinion already, so this is just confirmation bias for me where I'm like, people's cars are too big and they don't really
Hmm.
need them, and it makes us more dangerous because, we're driving big old tanks around. So I'm glad to also know that there's an
Yeah.
environmental reason on top of that, even for EVs. I mean, I think, bigger is better is sort of our thought a lot of times. If you would have said, do you want a bigger or smaller battery in a car? Like your immediate thought is, well, wouldn't a bigger one hold more? But with improvements, that's not necessarily always true
Yeah.
as technology progresses. If you had like an older, larger battery, that's not necessarily better than a newer, smaller battery.
Right. I mean, think about our cell phones and that type of thing,
Yeah, great
which
point.
yeah. I also just I hate driving big vehicles because I just feel like I'm gonna hit things. So I like driving a smaller car anyway. And obviously, I think like cell phones, as battery technology improves, like we're seeing now with this other one, we might be able to shrink the size of the battery in the same size vehicle. I don't know. But for us right now, on the consumer side of things, one of the things that we can think about doing is skewing our vehicles a little bit smaller. And then obviously, something that needs to happen is to improve lithium ion battery recycling, which we didn't really talk about at all. But it's not great right now, according to the EPA. Lithium ion batteries right now have a lot of things in them. So they have obviously lithium, cobalt, like we talked about, nickel, and manganese. Currently, cobalt, manganese, and nickel are recovered. Um, Lithium can sometimes be recovered, but it has to undergo kind of further processing for it to be useful. Once again, part of this is economics. It's expensive to do, and so a lot of
Right.
times it doesn't get done, which is frustrating. Once again, are we prioritizing money over right thing to do? What was the quote from the article? Safety is subservient to economic progress. So environmental safety is also sometimes subservient to economic progress, unfortunately.
I think so. Well, a long time ago, we interviewed the CEO of a tech recycling
Hmm.
company. And even prior to that, I had tried to do an
Hmm.
episode about battery recycling. And I found that similar to how you found this brine mining process so opaque that I found that entire industry such a strange amalgamation of informal battery recycling
Yeah,
in people's backyards, literally, and then large tech companies isolating out specific minerals
right.
that it seems like that is an area. Obviously, we've also talked about this with solar panels where forming recycling processes that also protect the end life of both the batteries materials so that it can be reused and then the people actually recycling the batteries.
Hmm.
Whew, man, we're getting into all sorts of territory today.
Yeah, it is a lot. And it is once again too, I feel like hard sometimes to determine where we're at. Like I was saying in
Right.
our artificial intelligence episode, like I'd be reading about something and then I'd be like, wait, like is this actually in use or are we talking like
Hopefully.
hypothetical right now?
Right.
Or is this, yeah, so there's a little bit of that too. I did find one company, I'm gonna say it's pronounced Lie Cycle. It's Li hyphen cycle. I don't know. It is a global lithium-ion battery resource recovery company that was established in 2016, and they are working on doing more of a closed loop battery supply chain. But again, I think that is sort of hypothetical in the future. So right now, they are taking batteries and they are kind of processing them. They I don't want to say melt them down, but that's what I'm going to say because I don't have appropriate terminology into something called black mass that then will need to undergo further processing to turn back into usable materials for a new battery. So they're like part way there in the process and they have hopes to close the loop here, but I don't think that they really have yet. But they're one company out there that is working with a number of different companies to
Make
like
this work.
yeah, like a electric vehicle what is like a truck fleet of electric vehicles to hopefully do that in the future. So that to me that's where we need to get to. We need to get to like lithium is recyclable. We just have to get to the point where we can process these batteries well enough to not just be able to break them down, but to be able to get that lithium to a place where we can reuse it again. So once again, it feels like for me as a consumer, hard to understand how I can push that needle more,
Yeah.
but I think that this is a big one that needs to happen. And then the third thing to kind of address some of the environmental and social justice concerns is just to be thoughtful about mining locations. So we have a list apparently of 72 proposed sites, most of which seem to be in Nevada, which seems weird because it's dry there. I don't know. Seems like not a great place that you would want to do a water intensive process, but
Ah, yeah.
so, but I think, that is the big thing too, is just to be thoughtful about mining locations. Once again, we're going to have to mine things
Right.
in life. So if lithium is one of them, if we can make this battery recycling feasible, then yeah, let's mine lithium and let's mine lithium here in the United States. But let's be thoughtful and maybe not mine in indigenous land where we still haven't cleaned up our old mines. And let's do environmental analysis before we pick these sites. And I have seen some of that. There's one article that will be linked that did kind of go through and list what species are at each location and things like that. So, it feels like a very common sense thing, but clearly it hasn't necessarily been done in the past. So hopefully that would help balance out some of those concerns.
If you're listening to this episode and you're like, Jesus just sounds so complicated, if you just even think for a moment about all the very, very complicated processes that go along with relying on fossil fuels, things
Yes.
like, international trade agreements that help control the price of oil and who gets to mine how much and at what rate they get to do that, and government subsidies that help control that price, and oil spills in the ocean, and how do we transport things, and where can we drill, and historically who have we marginalized to get that. Like we do this. Like we
Yes.
tackle big complicated things, and we do it in good ways and we do it in bad ways too. So I think taking the knowledge of knowing that we can execute a global energy strategy, and that's what we have been doing, just approaching it with, and how do we do that equitably, and how do we help the people impacted most to mitigate some of the safety risks and the labor issues, and how do we distribute this technology so it doesn't just help the most wealthy. We're humans, we're so smart. um we do this all the time. We just need to recognize that just because it's challenging doesn't mean that it's not necessary to look at this at the future, because we are already experiencing also the drawbacks of that complicated system around fossil fuels.
Yeah, absolutely. And just again to reiterate, basically anything that's a problem with lithium mining, except maybe if we are concerned about the brine issue, anything that's a problem with lithium mining is a problem with any other kind of
Yes.
mining, including for fossil fuels.
Yes.
Mining uses energy, mining destroys habitat, mining contaminates water. That's true across the board. So I don't, once again, want anyone to think because we're doing an episode on this means that there's more damage or more risk or anything like that associated with this than anything else. I wanted to do it because I feel like this is an important technology and I don't want people to be scared off of it. I also don't want people to move forward uninformed. I think it's
Yeah.
good to be thoughtful about both things. It's good to know the drawbacks of the things that we're using as well as the pros.
And it also helps you combat the scary social media
Mhm.
memes that want to prey on your fear of change and the idea that it's a little bit of a conspiracy out there against you, to have some of this background science knowledge to know, okay, I don't need my brain to fall right into that trap. It can think for a second, be like, no, I've learned some of it before. Maybe I need to investigate further before I share
Right.
a random meme on the internet.
All right. On that note, we've gone way too long. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for your discussion, Casey. Stick around one more moment, folks, and we'll be back with our challenges of the week. All right. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Once again, I know batteries are not as exciting as butterflies, but hopefully you learned something new, got something out of that. Lithium batteries, I think, are a good thing. We talked about their cons today, but they have their pros. Like we said at the beginning, these are fantastic energy little powerhouses, and they are rechargeable. So, I mean, just from that standpoint alone, we're not having to toss them every time we use them like we do with our alkaline batteries.
Have
So,
you ever tried to pick up a 5-gallon bucket full of alkaline batteries? Because I
no.
have. It is so heavy. I was part of like the battery recycling group
Oh, yeah.
in college, and we would go around and collect the trash cans full of batteries. It was so heavy. So yeah, really rechargeables are so nice.
Yeah. So they are in a lot of ways a really good thing for the environment. And I mean,
Yeah.
obviously the electric vehicle impact is huge. So, again, just to make that clear, despite the challenges with electric vehicle batteries, when you're looking at the full life cycle of the vehicle, electric vehicles are better for the environment than internal combustion engines. We should be asking questions, yes, about any emerging technology, but we cannot forget to ask them about the things that we've been doing for years too. So don't just be concerned with your lithium-ion battery. Maybe look at what went into your internal combustion engine as well. So,
Yeah.
okay, challenges for the week. fairly simple, actually. After all that complicated stuff that it feels like we sort of can't get a handle on, some things that we can do pretty easily. Dispose of your batteries responsibly. Look it up in your area, what that means. Definitely do not throw your lithium-ion batteries in the garbage. Do
Yeah.
not do not do that. It may mean taking them to a hazardous waste facility, or perhaps you have a recycling facility near you, so you can use something like Earth 911 to look that up and make sure that you're disposing of it properly. But all batteries, look up your battery type and make sure you're disposing of it responsibly. And then, like I mentioned earlier, one of the little things that you can do as a consumer if you're thinking about getting an electric vehicle for right now, maybe consider getting a smaller vehicle to make that battery size a little smaller. So focus on what we can change right now. There's a whole lot of links in the show notes this week if you want to continue reading or look a little more closely at anything else. But thank you so much for listening. And Casey, once again, thanks for all of your input and discussion on that one.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I was a little unhinged this episode, so I appreciate everybody listening to the end. If they want to tell us what we should talk about next, from batteries to butterflies, we cover a wide range of topics. Where can they do that, Sarah?
You can find us on Facebook, A Little Greener Podcast, or you can send us an email at alittlegreenerpodcast@gmail.com. We're always happy to hear from you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon, guys. Thanks for listening.
Bye.